Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Let us know in the chat where you're calling in from. Let us know if you're thinking about a new way to manage your appraisals, if you've already started to bring together a new program outside of the traditional performance review. A coffee shop.
Oh,
Oh,
good to
Seattle. Hello, Aubrey. We're going to give people a couple minutes to shuffle in here before we get started. We've got some revamping of mid-year cycles now. Yes, we're going to have a fun conversation today. British Columbia, Brazil. Oh, we got a global group here. I love this. Austin, Texas.
Mm.
Revamping some annual cycles. The world is our oyster. I love that. Aubrey, that's great. Hi, Renee from Vienna. It's one of my favorite places. I took our family there for Christmas. It was like a dream. Okay. We're gonna stop sharing so we can see everyone's faces. And let's get started. So hi everyone, my name is Misha Bartlett. I'm the head of sales at Pando. Today we are here to talk about killing reviews. So we're gonna have a very spirited conversation around how we can think about redesigning our appraisal systems to drive performance. And we have some really amazing people leaders, very seasoned people leaders to talk us through this. We've got Ricky Turner, who is the president from Real Talk HR. We've got Austin Sailors, who's the head of people at Craft.co, and Mark Puttress, who's the chief people officer from Nativo. I will hand it over to the three of you to just do quick intros, a little bit deeper on your background, your experience before we dive into the topic. Austin, you want to kick us off?
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Misha. Good to be here. Good to see you all, and love that some of you are in the process of redesigning or like really thinking about this. It's going to be a fun conversation. Yeah, I've been in people teams, leading people teams in B2B SaaS tech startups for the last few years here. Head of people now at Craft.co. We are reimagining supply chain intelligence for the enterprise, about a 70-person Series B company right now. So one of the smaller companies I've been at, actually, which is really fun. I also feel like the world is our oyster. There's so much that you can do early on it's not baked in yet. There's a lot that you can design. So I've actually brought Pando in for the first time. I worked with Misha and Barb at Pando at my previous company for a bit, but really had the chance to design something from scratch here at Craft that I'm really excited about. So I've seen all of it. The more traditional performance reviews, like inherited legacy systems. I've experimented with some things that haven't worked, and then I feel like I'm on the right track now, at least something that really works for our culture here at Craft and our time. So I'm excited to talk more.
Very good. I'll do a quick intro. So I'm Mark Puttress, Chief People Officer for Nativo. Nativo is in the ad tech space. We have been a niche player in native advertising. You probably don't even realize it, but when you're sort of, working through the open web on a website and you see sponsored content or ads right inside the editorial well that look like they sort of blend right into the site itself. That's the work that the Nativo team does. Prior to Nativo, I was the chief people officer for a ed tech company, much larger than Nativo. Nativo is about 200 employees, and prior to this, at Zovio, we were just about 3,000, so quite a few more employees. Really love this small team environment. It's given me an opportunity here at Nativo to be a bit more progressive in terms of experimentation, especially around performance management. And I kind of think of performance management more broadly around goal setting, performance reviews, ongoing development, and rewards. So this, kind of this sliver around performance and appraisals and sort of the evolution of it is quite interesting, especially because it doesn't seem to work for a lot of the stakeholders. So I can understand the frustration that people have around trying to get this right. And we certainly will have a robust and spirited discussion as people continue to experiment. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Hey, great. My name is Ricky Turner. I have about 20 years of experience as an HR executive. I was just sharing with everyone on the panel. I've been really fortunate in that I've had an opportunity to work for some really big companies like Whirlpool and Nike and Facebook. And I've also been chief people officer at some smaller Series B, Series C startups. So my perspective is pretty varied, and um, I've seen everything, right? I've seen managing performance with either death by PowerPoint and spreadsheet to really, really sophisticated programs. I've seen bespoke programs created by, a tech team with very little to do. And I've seen off-the-shelf programs implemented along the way. So hopefully I can share a little bit of insight with you based on my experience, and we'll have a great conversation.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. So as we start to dive into this conversation, I do want to remind everyone that this is definitely a conversation that we want you all to be involved in. So any questions that you have, any highlights that are sparking thoughts for you all, we want to learn from each other. That's the whole goal here. So drop everything into the chat. We'll have a Q&A at the end, but we will address questions throughout and want to hear what's resonating for you or not resonating for you. Maybe you've had some learnings that we haven't had that are in the group here. So keep the energy going in the chat. We'll kick things off by first just kind of presenting ourselves to Mark's point on what is the traditional performance review and what are some of the reasons why it's not working well for our organizations. Mark, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think as it relates to the traditional performance review, I mean, most of us grew up in organizations that had, your typical self-review. You'd kick this off over a period of time. There would be a series of deadlines to get a self-review done. The manager would then review it. You'd have your conversation with your leader, and the manager would do their thing. But it was usually every year, and you reflected on goals over that period of time. And, quite frankly, most of HR's role in this outside of design was chasing people down to get it done. So I always reflect on, gosh, if we have to work this hard to get people to get these things done, are they really working for people? And then we're always getting feedback around what's working and what's not. And, if at the highest level, trying to get a performance appraisal or review done reflecting over that long period of time, I think one of the dangers of that is that even though you're advocating for more frequent, timely conversations around feedback and development, it does give someone that sort of license to just wait and hold off, or especially if you lack confidence in having these conversations. And so then you think to yourself, well, is it really working for somebody who needs that timely, relevant feedback to be able to make a difference, right? Not only for themselves from a growth and development standpoint, but also for the business. So a lot of, I think opportunities to improve the way we've always done things and challenge the status quo and experiment with new things and new approaches and new designs and being intentional about it. That works for all stakeholders, the business, our people and leaders who are very much an important part of that process. So that's sort of, I think, the way I think of these annual performance reviews. So certainly we should, have Austin and Ricky chime in terms of their thoughts.
I'll jump in. So, uh, process. I'll try to center myself in history of reviews that kicked off um, in the military of all places, back with the Greatest Generation, right? And it kind of moved into the Boomers era, and then on to Gen X and Gen Y. And like a lot of stuff that happened back then, it just didn't keep up. My belief is that the fundamental issue with these types of reviews is an issue of fairness. I get they got a host of administrative issues, there's a host of behavioral issues, all of those things. But for most of the people that I talk to, it's not fair. I don't know what's going on, right? And just the thrust of it, when you think about it, the old school model, it sought to force accountability for something that happened in the past. And there were two outcomes. There was either financial reward or punishment. Like those are really, really like starkly different kind of things that an employee would be dealing with. So it's kind of on the basis of that energy that we begin to build these models and we try to tweak. But ultimately, I think what we're looking for, or what employees are looking for, is, hey, is this fair to me? Does this feel good when I go through this process? Is this going to hurt me in any way? Things I think about when I think, what's fundamentally wrong with the process.
Yeah, I agree with both of what you all said. Those are really interesting angles. And there's a lot, but I think two things that I will add or kind of key in on. One is just the amount of work and effort that it takes to do an annual performance review, or even if you do it twice a year and it's kind of your traditional self-reflection. What'd you do well? What didn't you do well? And, kind of like Mark is saying, the self-review, the manager review, peer reviews, you're spending so much time writing something, and we've all seen probably the people that write the novels, and some people do bullets, but managers for sure have to like shut down or do that second shift every night for a week or two to get this thing done. And it's such a slog, and I've seen that impact the business for us to have to spend that much time doing it. And so I think that's one big way that I feel it's broken. And the second is that I feel like the traditional performance review or appraisal process is completely, almost always very separate from a leveling structure or a job description or any documented expectations for the role and what the people are actually doing. So you might have a job description that you came in with, maybe you never look at that again, and then a year later you're asked to just kind of generally reflect on what did I do well, what can I do better, and if it's good, like those questions might be really well worded and like actually give you a lot of opportunity to self-reflect, and that's great. But I think that it's such a weakness to have that separate from the expectations that we would have of a certain person in their role, at their level, doing the kind of work that they're doing. So I think that, yeah, that's a big one for me, and trying to figure out how to connect that back to a set of expectations, connect that back to what it means to be in your role at your level, is a really big part of what I've been trying to fix about them, I think.
Hey, Austin and Mark, I was thinking back to one of our seeing you guys on video. The administrative piece, when you talk about writing a novella, I don't know if you guys remember we used to do lunch and learn sessions on how to write your performance review. And the amount of times was 3 times as many hours as you would spend in the review, right? Like signal like something maybe is not right with this process, right? That was just remembering back on those days. Interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the another thing that comes up for a lot of our customers is the review from an employee perspective and then from a manager perspective effective, from an HR team, is it, cumbersome, but also are we gathering the data that actually helps us drive our business forward and in the direction that we're trying to go? Are these insights unbiased enough that we can make decisions for the business based off of the data and information that we're gathering from this? And a lot of times it's not. And so we're making decisions that drive our businesses forward that are based on very shaky information. which can cause, a lot of challenges. I'm curious from all of you, for the people that are on this call, raise your hand if this is you, or drop it in the comments. But for people who are just thinking about, okay, I'm running a traditional performance review once a year, and I want to break out of this because I realize it's not working. What are some of the first things that I should think about in order to understand what's going to help this next version of performance be successful for my business? Because it is going to be different. We talk about it a lot as a journey for all of our customers, because everybody's businesses are different, your cultures are different. So I would love to hear from all of you on what your suggestions are to think about that first step.
I was just gonna, as we're looking at some of the chat, I was just gonna make a comment. For everybody who's here, this might be a bit of preaching to the choir, but I wanted to just, McKinsey had produced some research earlier this year that said, companies that are really focused on being intentional about everything in this sort of sphere of performance management are 4.2 times more likely to outperform their peers, seeing both an increase in both revenue and lower attrition. So kudos to everyone for being here and engaging in this conversation, because clearly with intentional design and thoughtful approaches to how we manage this area or lead in this area or influence in this area, it's really a collaborative effort, I think, with the broader business. But I think this is one of those sort of inflections in a business, if you get it right, can really have a material impact, because there are so many stakeholders. And I think what Ricky and Austin just alluded to in terms of the administrative burden, and where all of a sudden, like, you take an organization's focus and it is now focused on a 2-week period of time around performance, we've missed the boat, right? The organization shouldn't hiccup because we think performance management is important.
Yeah. I was thinking about that, right? You focus your organization for 2 weeks, maybe leaders for 3 weeks, and that's the HR team. It might be a month, 4, 5, 6 weeks for you. And that's an incredible administrative exercise. And the numbers say that something like 65% of the people don't like the process, right? Like, if there were anything else, right? If we were buying widgets or aircraft engines or whatever, if 65% of people didn't like it, you would blow it up and you would start all over with it. But this has been a kind of a process that's persisted for some reason, the bad. So that administrative burden is a very real and taxing exercise.
I don't want to say, I love what Bernadette is saying here in the chat about values. That was another thought swirling around in my head I forgot to say, but connecting review cycle feedback to the company values is huge. And that's something I think is often missed in a traditional appraisal cycle or a traditional annual performance review. And if it's done, if the same problem, if you're only doing it once a year and it's a big lift, but getting people to be thinking about the company values is going to drive not only, I think, better performance, but it's going to build a culture that can win and align people back to some sense of mission and connection to everyone else and teamwork. And if you don't articulate your values well, and then don't actually have them show up in how we're thinking about our performance and how we're doing and the self-reflection that we're doing about our time at work, then I think you're really missing something. So I love what you've done there, Bernadette. That's awesome.
Yeah, I like this idea of taking the different elements, and performance reviews, I know, is the focus here, but I think a lot of performance is, and those performance reviews are predicated on good goal setting, right? So you've got goals, you've got performance, you've got ongoing development and reward. And I think, to me, those are the buckets you sort of peel back and you really understand, because one of the dangers is these sort of shadow systems. I call them shadows, that sort of sort of lurk in the night, and they become sort of tangential to your process, right? You've got misalignment, or as Ricky was describing, people who are very talented writers,
Mhm.
we can have a bias towards those people who are really gifted in that space, and others who are not gifted writers may not represent themselves well. So that you almost, I give you just that as an example of really sort of peeling everything back and understanding it from first principles can really help you as you're rebuilding, especially for those that are going through one of those periods of revamp, or you've been given the license to really reimagine what this might look like. I would recommend just really peeling it back to those major buckets, and then really you don't have to get so in the weeds, but really understand the purpose and what the intention is behind it. And I think that will allow you also, when you're describing through the change management and taking people on the journey, that you've been really thoughtful and you really have unpacked it, and it helps you to articulate the why behind it when you sort of get down into those intentional pieces that you want to change.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm going to float a kind of a provocative thing that I would suggest you consider when you're starting to read them. Ask yourself, are you comparing employees to other employees, or are you comparing employees to themselves? Right? And organizations where you compare employees to other employees, if left unchecked, you can create this kind of Hunger Games environment, right? Where I don't need to be good, I just don't have to be the worst person, right? And again, that's big 80s with force rankings. Like that's where all that stuff comes from, right? I'm top 10%, you're bottom 10%, bottom 10%'s got to go every year, blah, 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 blah. And all the trauma that created. The truth is that those people that survived that trauma are now leaders, right? And so they bring some of those ghosts with them versus a system where it's a human approach. Hey, you've arrived to me at a particular state. I want to grow you just based on you. Like, where do you want to go, right? That I think changes the tone and the tenor and the energy around the review. It may even change the vocabulary, right? How you begin to think about things. Every organization is ready for that. It's a really introspective, mature conversation. And it's easier to stack rank people than personal growth and to articulate that. But I would throw that out there for this sharp group of people. Ask yourself, how are you doing the comparisons? And is it serving you well?
I love that, Ricky. And this is at risk of like getting on a bit of a soapbox here. I just feel so strongly about leveling and having like like as you're saying that, like, are you comparing against other employees or comparing against themselves? And I agree with everything that you're saying. And I see this in two buckets. Like there's the bucket of a manager should be developing and creating progression and growth and comparing the employee to how they did last quarter and last year. And that is what employees want. Like that's how we retain top talent. That is how we create something more fair and equitable. So I agree with you 100% on that. And I would just add to it that if you have and to be honest, like the pushback that I would get from CEOs that I've worked with, or the business, or even just like my perspective on like, especially a 70-person startup that just every single person has to be operating at their best capacity for us to, outlast our runway and like make it to the next milestone and like exist as a company. I think it's really important that in addition to that piece of like, we always are comparing to how you did before and helping you become better, that we have a set of expectations of like, how do we think that you should be performing? What should you be focused on? What are the skills and competencies that you should be growing in your specific role? And what do we mean by our values? Like, what are the behaviors that we expect and the behaviors that we do not expect that could be a way that like a pitfall you could fall into when you're trying to, one of our values is work toward excellence. And I actually think it's very well balanced with our second value of humility. But there are ways that you could be working toward excellence and be an asshole. And so we are very specific about what it means and what it doesn't. And then that becomes part of our appraisal cycle. So I think that we're starting to get to a good balance where we're doing what managers, hopefully, and some of them are, and all managers aren't all the same, but some are doing that thing where they are really focused on the employee's growth and development and what matters to them and how they're improving. But it is anchored in this idea of we actually have something up on the board. Like we're not just kind of like relying on the manager or the employee to figure it out as they go. We're like, hey, this is kind of what we expect of an L2 engineer. And
Mm.
half of what we expect is domain expertise and engineering and project management or whatnot, communication. And half of it is how do you align to our four core values?
Yeah.
Um, and so that piece feels to me like if you get that right, and that's hard because honestly, like that takes so much work. And I'll give a plug for Pando here because every other company I've been in, I have had to put a Google sheet up and work with managers and like box by box create a leveling structure
Mm.
that kind of aligns to a job description and kind of makes sense. And the managers agree to. I have to ask a lot of my managers. Pando came in here at Craft and like had a whole library of this, and we did some fun
Mm.
workshops with the Miro board, and my managers were able to like build a leveling structure that works for us without writing every box in, which is fantastic. But if you do that hard work up front and you're like, this is what we expect out of our engineers, this is what we expect out of CS, this is what it means to be an operations person at the company, I think it makes it easier to do the thing that you're saying, Ricky, which is then you can, from a less biased place, not be comparing against other people, but be comparing against their growth, their history, and just like a thing, like an artifact, a thing we've agreed on is like what the role looks like.
Yeah, I dig it. You're right, right? I dig Pando for a lot of reasons, and that is absolutely one of them. The expectations can be made very, very clear to people, right? And so then if you go through the assumption that okay, if we hire you, we hire to those expectations. So you walk in the door being an acceptable, L7 engineer, whatever that is, right? Or T2 engineer. You've arrived because you meet those qualifications. If there's derailment along the way, everybody's culpable, right? I have to ask what's happened or what have I done or not done, right? To me, that takes the focus off. There's something wrong with this person, right? There's something wrong, but it might not be with that person. We didn't onboard appropriately. We're not communicating expectations clearly, and we own some culpability, right? The historic model has been, I'm going to shift all of that accountability to the employee. The employee's broken, right? They're bad, so we must dispatch of them. That's I'm certainly in favor of that. I always push people change your thinking about what you're doing, what you're measuring, and how you're measuring. I always say again, I came from Facebook, and we would call it the annual execution of poor managers, right? Like every year. And it's not that they're bad, right? Numbers are down, revenue's down, so we need to sacrifice 10% of the leadership staff to Wall Street so that they still think that, we're doing what a horrible experience for everybody involved, right? HR team, employee relations team, the people that are having it, and then what a traumatic scar to have to carry around for the next time the stock price dips, right? So just I want to provoke, right? I want to plant seeds. I want to nudge us in the right direction. So in as much as people are building these processes, think about those things. That's all I ask.
So many great insights here. So many great insights. I'm curious, as you've tried different things, and Mark, I'll kick this off with you. But what have you seen go wrong with making changes or heard of going wrong as we think about trying out new things? Because it's right, it's bound to happen.
Yeah, I'll lead with something very provocative, and I think we all in the people and culture space, in the HR space, we really do need to hold ourselves accountable. We have a bit of a reputation for uh, renaming things and then deploying the same thing just with a different name, and we've got to be really cautious. And so that would be one landmine I would just highlight for everyone to just be really cautious. Like, for example, I think when we started to see that momentum with, I'll use some major brands that people are going to be very familiar with, like the Deloittes and Adobe and Colgate Palmolive. Like these were big companies that helped us sort of reimagine and move towards maybe a more frequent conversation around performance. But I think what happened is managers had this visceral reaction because it was like, okay, it was already a heavy lift to do the annual performance review, and now you want me to do it every quarter? And so we just didn't manage that well. And so I think if you are going to move, and I advocate, this is my personal point of view, I do advocate for something a little bit more frequent. It should be lightweight, right? And it shouldn't just look like the annual performance review that we've stuffed into every quarter, and just be super cautious about what you're actually asking of people. So it doesn't feel like you're doing your 2+ week annual performance review every quarter. So and this goes for every other program or design. Just be really cautious about sort of deploying the same program with a different name, because I think that's where we get into serious trouble with our business leaders, because they feel as though that's exactly what's happening, and they, not that they feel taken advantage of, but they feel like we're now just trying to defend our existence and not adding the value, when I absolutely am certain, because I interact with a lot of very talented people in this space, we have a lot of value to bring. So just don't get caught in that trap.
Mhm.
Ricky and Austin, anything coming up for either of you?
No, look, I don't need to cap what Mark's absolutely right, right? HR has a history of, okay, let me change the font, let me add bigger boxes, smaller boxes, let me, come up with a synonym for something, and voila, new process, right? Doesn't do us any help at all. So I am piggybacking on what Mark said. That's a great watch out.
Yeah, I agree. I would just say like it's so important. This is also piggybacking, but it's so important to come back to the first principles and just break it down and be like, what do we need? Like, what are we trying to accomplish here? What does the business need? What does my exec leadership team need? What do managers need? What do employees need? And just blank sheet of paper, figure that out. And it's different for every organization. So it's not going to be the same for all of us. So you have to do that blank sheet exercise on your own. And then you can like bare bones build, like what's the minimum that process that we could do to meet that need for managers, what's the minimum we could do, and then and it's not that hard, I think, to sketch out something very different. It might be hard to go and get alignment or consensus from every group on what the whole thing looks like, but I actually think that if you do it that way, you can get to something that's very different, slightly unique for your organization, that's meeting the right needs and isn't just a annual performance review done quarterly under a different name, because that's a nightmare. And I've seen that pitfall. I mean, I've felt it for my team where I'm like, oh damn it, like now we did twice a year because how great, and we're accepting promotions like every quarter, but our process is still so hard that my team is like, oh shit, we just did another one and now here we go again, having to do this big lift. And so actually figuring out how to make it different is the hard part. Yeah, but well said, Mark.
Austin, can I build off something? Because this is a lesson I learned, and I wish someone would have told me this a long time ago. I think one thing that I noticed, and what sparked this thought, Austin, is when you said, what does the organization need? I think a lot of, and this ties into a little bit around what Ricky said. We as when we're working with business leaders, and especially at the executive level, we bring to the work a lot of lived experiences, some of which have been good and some of which have been bad, but they've influenced us. And when you are doing that needs assessment, I wish I would have learned this. The need that we hear is sometimes biased and filtered by their experiences.
Mhm.
And so I only share that with you because when I dig in and I say, don't tell me what you think we need based on your experience, tell me what the outcome that you want, and let me leverage my expertise to help us get there, because they start to filter and start to direct us in a way that may not be the most meaningful in terms of getting the right outcome. And so I wish I would have, because you sort of you think you're doing the job justice and you're doing the organization justice by just inquiring and taking those needs and saying, well, that was the need you articulated. But remember, that need is coming with all of the trauma that Ricky talked about, and maybe what's worked in another organization for them. So it's almost like they're bringing that playbook forward. And so you just then go and start running, and then all of a sudden it doesn't produce the right outcome. And it's just because work has changed, expectations have changed from both the leader and the employee. And to Ricky's point, I'll end on this note. It always, and my organization, if they're listening in, they would know this because I say this a lot. It takes two to tango. And so it is always a collective effort. And to place a lot of the accountability solely on the employee is absolutely unfair. So just remember, it takes two to tango.
I'm going to encourage all of these HR practitioners, when you're going through that process that Mark talked about of asking those questions. I'm going to tell you because I know you all have this skill set. Bring some grace to the conversation. You may encounter an executive or a founder that says, I don't know, it's just what I've always done, right? When we say, what outcome do you want? I don't know. We just did it in my last organization, right? I thought we needed to do it. And that inflection point can either build you or destroy you. So you want to handle them gracefully, right? Without saying, oh God, it's got to do something. They don't, right? Maybe your founder, again, worked at a FIN company, they got a bunch of money, they thought like experience perhaps HR in a large enterprise and then in a very, very small amount. So they're not getting the top level HR experience that you provide. This may be their first time with a person like you. So handle them with grace and then guide them through that questioning so that you arrive at actionable outcomes, right? Without kind of, making them feel bad. I've seen that, right? That people, that's their response. And they're embarrassed, like, I don't know, I never thought about it. Okay, that's cool. That's why I'm here. Glad you hired me, right? This is the value that I provide. So think about that when you go through that process with them.
I love that. I've fallen into that exact pitfall where you're just playing whack-a-mole. Like, well, you said you wanted this, and so we did this, and then but it's what you wanted, and now it's here, and now it's not. Why isn't it working? And so you want this, and you're. I think that's easy for us to do in our function because we're so used to service and like giving, like helping the business do what they need and enabling others and like listening to the feedback. And so we can go too far in that direction, I think, where you're like asking for feedback and then kind of just trying to execute on what was asked of you, whether it's your CEO or leadership team or feedback from employees. And so that, I just love the way you both said it, but to really focus on the outcome and then bridge the gap with your own expertise, to trust that like if you can digest what the outcomes are that employees want or managers want or executives want or the business needs, then you can sit down with that blank sheet of paper and spend some deep time mapping that out, and like you'll know what to do and how to get there. And then you gather feedback and you keep iterating, but it's so different to do that process of focusing on the outcome and using your experience to bridge the gap than running around kind of anxious trying to make everybody happy, which I've definitely done, and it never works, and it's awful for everybody involved. So yeah, I've got such good call.
Cool.
So many great insights. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I know we want to make sure that we leave everyone with a tactical takeaway. So before we jump into that, I want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat for the group. We'll have a few minutes at the end where we'll go through some of those questions. Aubrey, love your insights so far from the session. They've been really, really helpful, I think, for the group here. So thank you for that. So let's kick it off. Mark, back to you. What's one thing that you would want the audience here to leave with?
Yeah, I think tactically, one thing that's really worked well for us is we thought that moving to more frequent conversations with less structure would be really beneficial. And what we're finding is we're still in this because of a lot of what we just talked about, these insights around what people sort of carry from the past, is that it was too big of a leap. And so you may, even though you want to move to more frequent informal conversations, you may still need a bit of structure. So that would just be something to be cautious about, because as one of my learnings is that we may have been just too hands-off and not enough formal sort of touch points were happening. And so just be cautious. That would be the tactical takeaway, is really ask a lot of questions, and not that you need to do a formal time and motion study, but really sort of examine the way people are behaving to see if taking too informal or too hands-off of an approach isn't giving you the appropriate outcome. So you may need a bit more structure, even if you do move to a more lightweight, informal approach.
Love that. Ricky.
Yeah, a couple of things. At the foundation, I'd focus on fairness and transparency at its bedrock, right? If you find yourself in these situations where employees don't know and it's a meeting that no one can come, like ask yourself, is this transparent and is it fair? And then try to build that into the system. The second thing is be human. Explain to people how they fit into the organization, explain to them how their job fits into what the organization is doing and how they impact their job, right? That's a tool that Panda provides. This is why we had you to do this thing. This is why you us. So make sure that you do those things, right? Explain to people how they fit in, how their role fits in, and what you expect of them.
Love it. Austin.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll just stay on the soapbox for a minute to say, like, get leveling right. One way or the other, Pando's an awesome way to do that, but you could even spend a few $1,000s on a consultant that could come in and like help you build a leveling structure in Google Sheets if that's what you want to do, or there's a lot of different ways to do it. It could also be a really actual part of your manager enablement program to like build some workshops with managers and have them be involved in designing what they expect of their employees. So I would say that just is such a bedrock of like everything else that you will build. And I think really helps you on both sides. Again, Aubrey, I loved what you said here on the kind of separating out performance assessments and career development, like having a leveling framework and something to point to helps with both of those. And it'll help employees feel like they can take ownership of what they're doing and how do they get to the next level? What does it look like to be an L3 if I'm an L2 now? Like they can look ahead and see what that's like. And that's so important. If you don't have that, then I think that just anything that you might do will be more difficult to tie back to business outcome, to have any sort of measurement, to help employees see where they can go next. And I would say get values into there. Like values should be a part of your expectations, a part of the level, like how you think about how somebody at an entry level embodies your values versus how like a C-level executive embodies your values. Like there are some differences there. And you can articulate some of those in a way that's really meaningful and helps to hold leadership accountable to the kind of culture that you want to build too. So yeah, I think that would be my big one. And yeah, Pando really helped us with that. It made it so much easier to do. So yeah, if you're learning more about Pando, like ask them about the leveling guides and the workshops and kind of the library that they have there, because that was definitely the easiest leveling build I've ever done this time around. So
So many Pando plugs. I love it. Selfishly as the growth leader over here. Thank you for all that feedback. I think Aubrey had a question. Aubrey, do you want to just jump on and ask the question? I see you're on camera.
Yeah, I just keep thinking of this idea of like simplifying, which is one of our company values, and just any great ideas on just doing less, cutting back. Um, yeah, and that could be for the audience as well, not just the panelists.
So one of the things we did when we did less is we tried to cut the documentation down, right? So we actually attacked documentation of the feedback. And I know that seems counterintuitive, but we were trying to promote more casual conversations. So we would use something like Pando to record that, hey, Ricky and Aubrey actually had a conversation. We're going to talk about these things, but we didn't take a volume of notes about every feedback session. I needed it to feel like, because it's just two professionals talking about, hey, we got this project. Where are you? How can I help you? What do you need from me? Right. So I would push back on the amount of documentation you have around over document every conversation. Do you really need all those notes from each of those feedback sessions? Some of them you do, some of them you don't. So I would look at that.
I like that. One small bit of simplification, and this came from, I think I was I had a very simple process that didn't include any sort of performance ratings at all. And my CEO and leadership team wanted a way to understand who are our top performers and what should managers be doing for them, who are like meeting expectations. Like we want something like that. And I really wanted to keep it incredibly simple, but give some power on the back end to like look at the data and also give managers, especially new managers, some guidance. And so we helped managers put people in one, two, or three buckets. Ones being like people who are exceeding expectations and say like, okay, so your job with these people then is to help them develop, nurture them, like give them opportunities to expand out. People who are in the two bucket who are like meeting expectations, give them one or two things that they could do to knock it out of the park and become a real impact player. And if you have anybody that's not meeting expectations, come talk to HR. Like let's figure out and give them some things to do to get to move up. And managers really liked this. It was a way for them to kind of very simply understand kind of where folks were and what we were expecting of managers, depending on how somebody was performing or how they were engaged. But it didn't detract from, I think, the career development and the more like humanistic approach that our managers already had with employees. So I'm still thinking about this. Like I think it bridged the gap. It was a simple way to kind of give exec leadership what they wanted to see and pull managers forward. But I'm not sold on it yet. But I think that like if you are trying to merge systems, going down to like a very simple like this or this, like what do we expect managers to do can be a nice way to do it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I think those are fantastic. I think when it comes to simplifying, one of the complexities I think that arises from performance reviews is the nucleus of those performance reviews, and that's goals. And so trying to figure out because I mean, there's KPIs and there's individual goals and there's OKRs. And I think once we got that dialed in, it helped those performance conversations flow so much better. And I think that's one of the things that organizations really struggle with at the moment. And it's one thing that would be really helpful is the priority focus on the individual or on the team? There's been a lot of debate on, how does the team, I mean, I forget, somebody once said, do you want a group of high performers or do you want a high performing team? I heard this at Transform this year, and I thought that is like one of the most brilliant questions that we should be asking ourselves. And I'll say it again. So I certainly am not taking credit for it because I heard it at Transform, but do you want a team of high performers or do you want a high performing team? And I think it's something that many organizations are struggling with. So if you can get the nucleus of this sort of set around and simplify the goal setting, it will then fuel how you execute those performance reviews.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we found with our clients too is there's this perception that if you're anchoring things to levels and competencies and providing more structure, that it's more complex. And it actually makes it easier for everyone to execute, and it gives everyone that even playing field. So we are thinking more of how do we optimize for impact potential of our entire employee base as opposed to those high performers, because that's what traditional performance reviews are really focused on. So unfortunately, this time flew by. I knew this was going to happen. I think I said it to the panelists multiple times. We could stay on here for multiple hours, I'm sure. But thank you to everyone who joined us. If you have questions, please send them our way. We can share them with the panelists. They are all, obviously, as you can see, very knowledgeable, happy to talk about things after the fact. So send them through. If you have any questions about Pando, please send them to me. It's just misha@pando.com. Happy to connect with you all. And join us for our next session where we're going to talk about building inclusive and high-performing teams.
And real quick, Misha, sorry, for anybody who had an issue getting in, Splash has confirmed with us that the issue has been resolved, but we also emailed everybody direct Zoom link, so you have both options, either back at the event page or in your email. You should have the Zoom links, and we will send those out tomorrow as well, just as a backup. So you'll need to, yeah, hop off of this meeting and get to the next one for the next session, but it should be resolved. Please email us if you have any issues, but you should be okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ricky. Thank you, Austin, for all of your knowledge and words. Have a great day, everyone.